yet I don't know what happened, Sarah.
But I think that one of the facts is that media had time to prepare because we knew that he was ill. I mean, he hadn't been seen in public since 2014.
Yeah.
And he's been, out of public office since 2007. So, I mean, and everybody knew that his health was very, very frail. So the preparations were already done, as it is. And we must just say, in all media outlets, there are always preparations for people who are likely to pass away.
Yeah.
It might sound a bit cynical, but that's how it works.
Absolutely.
People work with to collect information of people's life, etc., to be able to as soon as possible. As cynic as it might sound.
Yeah.
But in this case, they had a long time, and there was talk about him being very, very bad the days leading up to his death. But yes, it's interesting because it was not only, I mean, yes, you can imagine the 24-hour news channels would go all, 100% Chirac, but even Libération, left-wing newspaper, they also did big coverage of Jacques Chirac's death.
Yeah.
But it's one thing. I mean, we can also talk about the fact that it's one thing you cover the life and politics of a politician. But there was very little talk about the more controversial sides.
Absolutely.
Of Jacques Chirac. There was a lot of talk about how he said no.
In
to the
2003.
word. Exactly.
Yeah.
Was a lot of talk about that. It was a lot of talk about how he his Lebanon connections, for example, how he was the only statesman who arrived at the funeral for former Prime Minister Hariri and etc. It was a lot of talk about that, but very little talk about those nuclear tests
in Polynesia.
Exactly. And very little talk as well about the fact that he's actually the only French president who has been convicted of corruption.
Yeah. 2 years imprisonment. But he was too ill to go to prison already, so he never went to prison. But still, this was a corrupt president, and you can't mention it enough. But apparently the French totally forgot, because most of the stories we saw and read in the media were all these memories of former politicians, but also normal people who told how friendly he was, how charming, how he loved to eat French food, and all these personal things. And actually, it was very rarely mentioned that he was just a crook. He was a very charming one, but a crook nevertheless. And that's, I think I really don't understand why the media went completely bonkers on the death of Jacques Chirac, and it was really sometimes very embarrassing.
And we even saw, now the socialist mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, publishing this very emotional homage to Jacques Chirac. In the name of the Parisians, and thanking him for everything he did for
in
Paris.
Our name as well.
Exactly, and without even mentioning, the guy is convicted of having, stolen money from the Parisians.
Yeah, from the local town hall. Yeah,
and I think that no one is questioning the fact that of course you have to be respectful, and he was a politician for a very long time, and many French people really grew up with him as a central figure in French politics, but very little talk about those more controversial sides of his career.
And also his political heritage is actually not very impressive. When he was a president, he didn't do a lot.
He's known for being a president. His second mandate is known for being the mandate of nothing, because he actually didn't push through with anything. No. Apparently, he was very afraid of dividing the French, and in the beginning of his second mandate, very afraid. He didn't knew how to bridge that growing divide. So he decided to not even try to go there. And then, he had a stroke during his tenure, and after that, many say that it was more difficult for him to actually work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should not forget to mention that in 2002, when he was elected for the second mandate, he was elected against Jean-Marie Le Pen, and he was elected with 85% of the votes. Some African dictatorship would be very jealous of this score, but many people blame him for the fact that he had also all the left-wing voters voted for him because they didn't want to vote for the extreme right, and he never ever did something for them. So
he never thanked them for their
votes. He promised a lot, but he never bridged actually his policies with the left-wing voters. And indeed, he was more or less paralyzed. But as soon as he was no longer a president in 2007, when he was succeeded by Nicolas Sarkozy, he became one of the most popular figures in France. And I think a lot of French also see in him some kind of idea or a myth of France that has disappeared, like a womanizer, good food, a big mouth in international politics.
Un bon vivant.
A bon vivant. And I think also, a lot of people were maybe sad about the loss of, I saw that some media spoke about him as a father of the country.
I know also that many we heard a lot in the media coverage about, France mourning its former father or at least president. But it was quite interesting as well that there has been the Élysée Palace, the presidential palace here in Paris, opened up on the night of his death, the doors to the Élysée Palace so that French, and foreigners as well, could come in and write in the book of condolences. So there was this possibility of people to express their grief, etc. The number of people who actually did that, it's not staggering. The numbers are not staggering. And when we saw when it was the funeral on Monday, of course you have these images of the coffin, going through the streets of Paris, etc. But when you look at the images, not that many people came out. No. So there is also this question of, yes, of course, people can feel sad, and you have people who will always express their strong feelings when someone passes away. But how important and how big was actually the grief of the French people? I'm not sure that it was as big as the 4-5 day rolling media coverage actually wanted to make it sound like.
Yeah, no, I think it's really something very Parisian. All the media, of course, are based in Paris. I think the rest of the country, I wonder if when Hollande dies, or Sarkozy, or Macron, if there would be the same orgy of media attention. I'm not quite sure.
Well, hopefully we will not find out in a very long time.
No, but when we do, we'll talk about it in So French.
Now, to some more positive and actually quite fascinating news, and it could be the proof of God. I don't know, Stefan, a completely paralyzed man here in France actually learned and can now move again.
Yeah, that's actually it's a proof of science, because this is a very impressive scientific undertaking. Indeed, a man has been able to move all 4 of his limbs again with an exoskeleton suit. Now, an exoskeleton suit is like a sort of a robot suit that helps to move your limbs and your muscles. It's also sometimes used more and more by soldiers because they become much more powerful. So it looks like a sort of a Robocop if you wear it. But the more interesting thing or fascinating thing is that this paralyzed man, he is controlling this exoskeleton with his brain.
Wow.
That's indeed, the guy is called Thibault. He's only 30 years old, and he became paralyzed a couple of years ago, by an accident. And what the scientists did, they implanted, on the surface of his brain, so under his skull, sensors that capture the part of the brain that controls movement. It's really fascinating, and it's about the size of a big coin, the sensors, and they put this in his head, and the brain waves of Thibault, they send messages to the robot, to the exoskeleton, and that makes it move. So if Thibault thinks, I want to move my legs, then the legs move. So he's still paralyzed, but the exoskeleton that he's wearing around him with a computer and very sophisticated little motors and stabilizers. They respond to what he thinks.
Wow, this is
really.
What this could lead to is, of course, incredible, and the impact it could have on paralyzed people's lives.
Absolutely. It is a test that started in 2017 by Clinatech, which is part of the University of Grenoble, which is in the Alps. They have been testing it for 2 years. And this week they published actually their research into The Lancet, the very famous medical scientific magazine. So it was approved by peers, so it's also medically approved. And it's really fascinating. And of course, it's really new, and the scientists are still researching and developing it, and they say they are continuing to refine the technology. It's basically now limited by the amount of data that can be read from the brain, because the brain is, of course, bigger than the biggest supercomputer in the world, because otherwise the computer can't follow the brain. And it only takes 350 milliseconds to go from thought to movement. So it's almost immediately.
Almost immediate.
Yeah, and it's just a fascinating story. It's of course
difficult for this guy though to do several things at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, you have to stay focused on one thing because otherwise maybe the computer is getting a bit lost.
Yeah, but it's fascinating because it means there's a hope for handicapped people, paralyzed people, and it's really interesting because they've been working 2 years with this person, of course. And it's just, if you look at the images, it's really fascinating. We'll put a link to a video on our website, sofrench.news, so you can judge for yourself. But maybe this is a whole new step to, I don't know, how your body works. Maybe one day, if we're just hanging in the couch watching Netflix, we only need to think that we want to see Stranger Things now, or maybe House of Cards, instead of moving our body.
I see, and you really see the
remote control.
The big and most important things that we could learn from this experiment.
Absolutely, it's amazing scientific progress. So this week coming from Grenoble.
That wraps up this edition of So French. We hope you have enjoyed it. You can listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, and we are also on Instagram. Our account is @SoFrenchNews. Please follow us there.
And if you like French music, you can check out our free playlist on Spotify, which we update regularly. Just search for So French Music or click the link on our website. And if you would like to contact us, please mail us on news@sofrench.news.
You can also listen to us on air on World Radio Paris, the station, with a lot of excellent shows in English, not only in the Paris region, but also now on Côte d'Azur around Monaco, Nice and Cannes. So French is broadcast at 2:30 p.m. local time on Saturday, and then there are reruns during the week.
We'll be back in 2 weeks again with a new episode of So French.
We hope you will join us then. Thank you for listening.
Au revoir.